Hi, kitty cats. I am Amethyst Herrick, your hostess for Gender Identity Weekly, a weekly discussion about identity and gender from the contributors and guests of the Purple Pop Publications website, genderidentitytoday.com. This content right here is brought to you by subscribers of genderidentitytoday.com. If you are already a subscriber, first of all, let me thank you for your ongoing support, because you know just as well as any of the other subscribers that subscribers not only receive new content directly to their inboxes as soon as it publishes, but are also able to interact with every contributor directly, which does include me. So, bring it on. If you would like to support shows just like this one, as well as other podcasts, videos, and written articles by our contributors, please consider subscribing using the links you're going to find in the show notes. Well, I am so honored and happy to welcome Lindsay Bindman to the show. Hi, Lindsay.
Hi, so happy to be here.
Oh, not as happy as I am to have you here. So, Lindsay is an advocate, an ally, and a sailor. She is also hostess of the Getting Reflective podcast, which is actually how I met Lindsay, and I just fell in love with you in a completely not creepy sort of way. That came out weird, didn't it?
It was mutual. No, it was mutual.
Okay, phew. All right. So anyway, podcaster, she's so much fun. Lindsay, I'm so glad, to be able to interview you now. You even said, yeah, you don't really do this, but I'm so glad you made an exception. So it means a lot.
Thank you so much for wanting me to come on. It's so exciting. And I loved our conversation so much a few weeks ago that I would have obviously jumped at the opportunity to have it again. And now we get to do it each way. Like we get to switch roles. So yeah, so happy to be here.
No, it's going to be fun. I swear it's going to be so much fun because so the whole point, the big word that you use in Getting Reflective is unlearning. And I'm going to read a little quote from you here, which is funny because I may as well just have you say it. But so on your website, it says much of what we're taught as young people and what is then reinforced by mainstream media is wrong. And the big point there is that people are not born racist, sexist, or homophobic. They learn it, and so we must unlearn. Unlearning is a big deal. It's a very big deal for you. So let's start off. I'm just curious, what was your childhood just filled with ideas that were wrong, or what happened there?
Yeah, you know what? I'll say yes, it was, but not in a way that I think was very dissimilar to most people's experience. I mean, I'll set the stage a little bit. I'm 30 years old. I grew up in the Greater Toronto area here in Canada. And, I was raised with many privileges. I'm a white cisgender woman who my dad always acknowledged won the lottery and being born in, the particular place and time that I was and that we were. And, was raised in a fairly middle class, privileged family where we were able to, lead a really happy, comfortable life. And I was able to go to university and things like that. But as I developed, those really critical thinking skills that allow you to really question and challenge the messages that you're taught as a young person and that are reinforced sort of through every available channel, whether you're talking media, movies, songs, and just like the discourse that takes place in society, you start to really, once you realize that one of those messages is like poisonous, you kind of start to realize that, that maybe more of them are poisonous. And so the harmful things that, to answer your question about my childhood, and I know that in your podcast, you focus a lot on gender. So I was reflecting on that leading up to our conversation of what was it like to be raised as a little girl, right? And when it's funny, actually, if I can, I know you love a tangent, so hopefully you'll love mine too. Like a little side quest story. But my dad was here. He's sailing around the world, as you know, and we'll circle back to the sailing thing in a minute. But when he was back briefly over the summer for my brother's wedding, I asked him to digitize all of our home movies from my childhood. And I was kind of expecting 6 or 8 clips of things that I knew we had recorded, but it was actually like 10 hours of my whole childhood from like birth to 10 years old. Yeah. Yeah. And I will say, I don't know that we as humans are really meant to like watch that. It felt like I was in a Black Mirror. Like it was really, after a while, like you do start to lose your mind a little bit, and just like seeing how your parents interact with you as a little kid, like memories that you've lost. Yeah, it was really interesting. But yeah, I think back to like, when was that sense of childhood kind of shattered, and when did I start becoming aware that the world is not that safe and happy of a place? And just speaking as a cisgendered young woman, I think the first crack that showed for me was the idea that boys and men were entitled to my body, and that the greatest thing that I could do in this world was be visually and sexually appealing to boys and men. And it's funny, like I don't know, I couldn't tell you the first time or the way that idea was first planted in my head, but I can remember getting ready for my first day of high school. Even before high school, I can remember going to middle school, like grade 6, 7, 8, and like caring so much about how I was perceived, particularly by boys and men. And I just wish that I could go back and speak to that little girl. And sometimes people ask you, like, what would you say to your childhood self, And I would just want to like squeeze her and be like, you are so much more than your physical casing. And like, who gives a fuck about boys and men as well? Like, ew. But yeah, that message was really planted really early. And I think it was really reinforced, and it was reinforced through notions of fat phobia. And like, to be 13 and already hating your body is like just so, I mean, that is not a unique experience. And it's not even only women or cisgendered women that feel that, I know. And you and I have spoken about your experiences as a young person as well. But it breaks my heart that for myself and for anyone I know, like, to imagine that they hated their bodies at such a young age is really wrong. So yeah, those are some of my initial reflections on childhood.
Yeah. What strikes me as somewhat ironic, maybe, you said you learned that the world was not exactly a safe place. And then you got on a sailboat and sailed around the world? Because that seems like not what I would like. I wouldn't go, you know what, I'll be really safe if I just go out in the middle of the fucking Atlantic or whatever ocean. Really? So how did that happen? How did that come about?
It's such a funny segue. It's a great point by you. So to answer that, I'll have to quickly set the stage on my father, who is an incredibly, I would say, cinematic and unusual, larger than life kind of a guy. His name, first off, is Daniel Daniels. So just digest that.
Wow.
His mom really had made a choice there. But he goes by Dan. So Dan Daniels. And he's kind of a little bit famous in his own right. He in his early 20s rode his bicycle around the world for about 3 years. And through that experience, he really just fell in love with discovering new places and living like the locals live. I mean, he would have done this with no money. He wasn't raised with that sort of financial privilege. So I think his budget was like less than $10 a day or something. And so he did that for 3 years as a uni break. Yeah. And then he came back in his early 20s and had the resolve or the vision that he was going to do it again one day by boat. And so he bought what was ultimately our first family sailboat that he was living on when he met my mom. It was called Dashin. I think it was like a 30-footer, like nothing huge, but enough that a family of 4 could sleep on it. And he actually sailed it down to the Bahamas when I was a kid. And then my mom and brother and I flew down and met him there. So sailing and the boat life was a huge part of my childhood. Like summers, we practically lived on it, sailing Lake Ontario. And when my parents split up when I was 11, shortly after, my dad sold the family home and we moved on to a slightly larger boat, the one that he's on now, that was a little more suitable for like ocean sailing, cross ocean sails, big open ocean stuff, and like circumnavigating, which was his dream, his vision.
Yeah.
And so in 2015, he left Toronto to sail around the world. It was something he thought he would do in 3 years, which was a huge underestimate. He'll say COVID delayed him, which it did. But I think ultimately he just recognized that it's not the kind of thing that you want to do in a rush. And he's probably always somebody, regardless of whether he had the language or not to name it this way, who was quite anti-capitalist and really rejected the idea that we're really just on this planet to work and make money. And he worked in the movie business for his career in Toronto. And it's an incredibly demanding industry, like 16-hour days were the norm. And so on the one hand, that funded a lot of these travel dreams and the ability and privilege to be able to retire early and go and sail around the world. But on the other hand, that came at a cost. And there are so many counterparts of his, peers and friends who have passed away early or are unfortunately battling disease and health concerns that are certainly brought on or exacerbated by that kind of lifestyle, not sleeping and just some of the other things and habits and lifestyles that tend to come with that industry. So so he left in 2015. So it's been over 9 years, 9.5 years. And I have had the privilege of doing big sections of that journey with him. So in the first year, I supported him through the East Coast of Canada, the United States. I did Key West. I some of this, I was flying back and forth. I did Colombia. But my biggest stretch was I spent 6 months sailing the Caribbean chain with him after I graduated university. So skipping convocation, I flew down to the USVIs and I helped him sail every single island in the Caribbean chain. And it was one of the most memorable experiences of my life, truly.
Oh, I'd have to imagine. That's just 6 months too. That's great. What did your father know how to sail before he bought a boat, or did you just go, I'll figure it out?
It's such a good question that I feel like is not asked enough. I would say he's completely self-taught. Like he has like every book on sailing that a person can have. But I do think that there is a lot of like just learning by doing that he had to experience. And I'll say like the family boat that he started on, Dashin, was like very much like a lake boat, I would say. Like, he was very well versed in sailing around Lake Ontario and that was all fine. But I think there's been certain experiences in these last 9 years that I don't even know if there is much that can prepare you for like being in a lightning storm, with like 10-foot waves crashing over the bow. Like it's funny being in a situation like that, because we've been in some storms together. And typically, like when everything is smooth sailing, he's very much like the captain, and he even in jest refers to himself as Captain Dan Daniels, which is a total reference to Pirates of the Caribbean. And I'm definitely like what can I do? Tell me what to do, whatever. First mate, if you will. But when there's like something that starts to feel like a life or death situation, I actually found that we kind of did a bit of a role reversal. And I was like, okay, well, we might die. So in that event, like, what can we do to minimize? How can we minimize this? And I've definitely seen him like scared for his life. So I don't know how you prepare for that. So I guess, I would say like he prepared as much as he thought he could. And then he just had to like get out there and start doing it.
I would imagine. Wow. I've actually been sailing on Lake Ontario, believe it or not.
Have you?
Yeah. Maybe we passed each other. Two ships passing in the night, right?
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You never know. Except this would have been, you would have been like a teenager. It was like 15 years ago, 16 years ago. So
yeah, we totally could have. That was my prime time Lake Ontario days. Whereabouts were you sailing?
Oh, well, we were coming out of Rochester. I had a friend who had a boat docked there. Sorry, I don't know the terms. I don't know the lingo.
That's the term.
Docked? Okay.
That's the term.
All I know is that they were like these big pieces of fabric, and with the wind blew, and I was kind of upset because I messed up my hair.
Fair reaction.
Because even then, even then I was a little bitch. So, um, it's interesting. Now you've mentioned your body shaming, in particular, body shaming. But then you also mentioned you watched your father work 16 hours a day. Whatever. Well, long hard hours for the movie industry, and he had friends who actually died early because of that. I mean, how much did that end up informing like the rest of your philosophy now, that you really have to question what it is you see in the world and go, okay, eject the stuff that doesn't work?
Yeah, I like that link that you draw, because I would say that my dad has been a huge influence for that kind of critical thinking and rejecting a lot of the stuff that you're taught. And again, I don't think he had the language that we're using now, but he's very smart and he definitely challenges the status quo. And I think growing up and knowing that his goal was to do this by boat and to really take what society says is success, or society thought he should do, and just say, fuck it, I'm going to go sail around the world actually and discover what the meaning of happiness is in different cultures and countries and contexts. And I am going to be the master of my own days and destinies and live in a lot more of a harmony with nature and the water, and just be out there and really think about what is important in life. And I think that was probably my first real experience of unlearning, interestingly, was watching him do that, and definitely like seeing the impact firsthand of him being in an industry where, when he was working, I saw him like a day a week, maybe. And of course he'd have long stretches where he was between, he'd have stretches where he was between gigs, but when he was working, we weren't seeing a lot of him. And so I was aware at a really young age of what that does to a marriage, and what that means for fatherhood, or, just parenthood in general. So I definitely have a strong sense of like the importance of work-life balance instilled, and just really wanting to make sure that whatever I did with my career didn't feel like work to the greatest extent that that's possible, like to really love what you do, because you're going to end up spending such a significant portion of your life doing it. Mm-hmm. So I would say old Captain Dan Daniels has been a huge influence on just the framework of critical thinking and questioning,
Yeah. And is that how you define unlearning? It's a framework of critical thought?
Yeah, I think it's a framework of critical thought. And I think it's sort of daring to ask, what could we replace some of these harmful ideas with? Like, what is the better knowledge that we could be equipping ourselves with instead? So if it's something like, you've got to work yourself to the bone, and the only way to be successful is with this narrow definition of a title or a salary figure, or, how many cars you have, or any of these things that, of course, a capitalist system would really like you to define yourself by, and ask what could we define ourselves by instead that are so much healthier and more authentic and true to the human experience, right? Like, what if we define success by the quality and health of our relationships, and the quality and health of our mental and physical bodies and selves? And what if we define success as the way in which we love others, and how strong our communities are? And I've always been extremely relationship minded and really motivated by cultivating strong long-term relationships, and I sort of built my career around that. But I think that's the central tenet for me of unlearning, is asking yourself, like, is this serving me? Who is it harming? And what is that better knowledge that we could be using instead?
Such amazing questions. I mean, that is exactly looking inside and going, what is it that I truly want out of life? I mean, I think that's great. I mean, at least there's one of you in the world, right? I mean,
That's so sweet. But I think like part of what I'm doing with my podcast and surely what you're doing with yours is like you're helping equip people with some of these frameworks and ways of thinking and questioning things, right? And you're able to kind of connect with somebody who you think like, okay, they've got a bit of that like magic sauce, right? And I want to help beam that person's words and ideologies into the homes and the cars and the like earphones of my listeners who, you know, maybe are just needing some priming in order to do this in their own contexts, you know?
Yeah. I got to ask too, because I mean, I know also at university, you study communications, right? Just to make sure on that you did. Okay. Because I didn't want to go off on
Yes,
it.
I
didn't want to
did.
ask it. Yeah. I can imagine I ask a question and you go, what are you talking about? I did physics.
Where'd you get that from? Physics, yeah. I don't have the math for that.
Newtonian mechanics. I don't know what you were talking about. Anyway, but and now what's funny is now I've lost my train of thought. Well done.
Sorry.
I do know. No, I do know. What's interesting. The question I wanted to ask you, we struggle really badly with seeing exactly what you're talking about. I mean, the reason why mainstream media is mainstream is because we chew it up. We love that. You know, we don't want to challenge those beliefs. Why do you think this is? I mean, are we that dumb? Are humans that dumb?
It's such a good question. So I would say for most of these things, for most of these topics, whether you're looking at a capitalist economy or you're looking at fat phobia, you're looking at the rigid gender binary, for example, white supremacy, right? If we want to get super uncomfortable, it's discomfort, right? It's uncomfortable to have to look at those things because they've manifested themselves so intimately in our brains and hearts and identities. And so I find that what's hardest for people, and I think it's harder the older that you are, because I have these conversations with my mom and my stepdad to an extent, and my dad and people of their generation. And the longer that you have been attached to these beliefs, the more rooted and connected they are to your sense of identity. So I'm actually going to give an example around racism, because this was explained so well, I believe, at the height of 2020 with the murder of George Floyd and Black Lives Matter, taking such strong hold everywhere globally. Couldn't have been looking away at that time. And I think the thing that was so confronting for a lot of like, quote, well-meaning white people is that the sense of self as like a good person was so intrinsically linked to who they were as a person, as a human being. And so to be able to hold space for the duality of like, I am upholding and benefiting from a system of white supremacy, and I'm a good person, and I want to see myself as a good person. Like those two things were so contradictory and uncomfortable that people kind of shut down, and they were like, this threatens my core sense of self as a good person, as a good member of my community. And so I think with a lot of these ideologies, messaging that we receive as young, from the time we're born, really, when they have linked to our sense of self, which they all have, there's going to be a real discomfort that you have to learn how to sit in order to start doing that unlearning. And I think a lot of people, I'll just add, it's to sit in that discomfort takes stamina and endurance. It's like a muscle. And if you've never sat in that discomfort before, it's like going in an ice bath. Like you're like, oh, get me out of here. Like, what the fuck, right? But if you get used to it and you train your body like running, you can start to build that up, build that endurance over time. So in the first instance, I will say people typically don't do it, not because they're dumb, but because it's really, really, really uncomfortable and it threatens their sense of self.
But we have to accept, you know what, before I ask that question, have you done the ice plunges? Do you do that?
Yeah, ironically, I really fucking struggle with those ice baths, man. But I tried. I did. I think I got in for like 15 seconds or something.
Oh, I started, it was the beginning of 2024. I started taking cold showers.
Okay.
And it helps. Like I lost weight. I don't know why, but I lost maybe because I was shivering so much. I burned a lot more calories. But it's actually good. It was hard. Like I didn't get sick as often, and it was good for like sore muscles. You would go, no, cold, no, that's not good for sore muscles. It is. It's the weirdest thing because it shocks you. You get dopamine, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm pretty fucking relaxed. Once you get out, it's not.
That's amazing. That's amazing. The only time I've done cold showers has been absolutely not by choice when I was living on the boat or sailing the Caribbean, and we would have these like shower tokens to go up to the marina, and often there was no hot water, and you were just like, well, here we go.
Yeah. No, try it. It's actually, you'd be surprised. Try it for like 30 days. If you can do 30 days in a row, that look is saying, no, thank you. I understand. That's fine. All right, let me get off the ice thing. Really? Okay. So here's the question. Because when all of the stuff that you talked about, like let's call it entrenched racism, let's call it entrenched gender binaries, whatever it is, we accept these ultimately. I mean, at some point even if it's like filling a vacuum, so I suddenly turned into Sir Francis Bacon, I think, right? This is nature abhors a vacuum. Is that, who knows? Anyway, can I be Dame Francis Bacon? Does that work? Francia Bacon? Okay.
Yeah, man.
All right, moving on.
I like it.
Cool. But we actually have to accept these. And if we don't really truly agree with them, why the hell would we accept them?
It's a great question. I think society probably rewards you for accepting those ideas, right? Because society wants you, and the power structures that exist want you to be good little agents of capitalism and white supremacy and heteronormativity, and to perform your gender, quote, correctly. And I think there are a lot of tools of silencing and tools of punishment at every turn when you do dare to unlearn and do it differently. And we see examples of that all across the queer community, right? And you look at the history of LGBTQ activism, and I think about an example like Marsha P. Johnson. I was just in New York last weekend and looking at the Stonewall Visitor Center and looking at all of these important activists that came before us, but also sitting with the grief of like how they were failed by mainstream society for fucking what? For just expressing their authentic selves, right? So I think fear is something that we can't ignore in these conversations as to like, why don't people do it? I mean, I mentioned it was uncomfortable, but I think also there's such a strong understanding, even if people aren't thinking about it critically day to day, that like, if I don't do it this way, if I don't do the job and the wife and the perform my gender and whatever else it is and uphold these systems, then I'm going to be punished, or I'm not going to have friends, or I'm not going to be employable, or society will ridicule me for my choice of partner or clothing or jewelry that I wear. And so I think a lot of people are scared for what they think that they'll lose, or what they might actually lose for living in that authenticity and challenging those systems. Because I think the systems don't want to be challenged, right?
Do you know, I'm going to say yes. I'm just going to say yes, because that's one of the ways that one of the things I have said about social environments. The biggest purpose of a social environment is to reinforce the social environment, which is what you just told me. And it's surprising that I didn't like come up with that on my own, but that's a beautiful, I mean, what a great explanation. It really is just because you have a social environment that needs to, it doesn't want to die. And so it reinforces reinforces it through social norms. What a perfect, thank you. See, this is why I need to talk to you.
You're so generous. You said that exact thing in our episode. So this is a full circle moment for us.
Wait, did I really? Oh, well, that's good.
You did.
Cool. Because I had a question here, right? That says, do you think these erroneous beliefs end up serving us? And if not, then whom do they serve? And it serves the social environment, which is so ridiculous that I don't, like, I'm sitting here in a little bit of I'm not sure what word I want to use. Like at this point, I'm kind of going, oh my gosh, yeah, it's just stupid social environment. Why do we do this to ourselves? We're like little lemmings. It's not stupidity.
Mm-hmm.
It's fear, as you said. But I don't know. You would think at some point we would just kind of go, wait a minute, I accepted this. Do I even believe it? But looking inside is tough. And I guess I know this, having spoken to people and having had to do it. But there's no doubt contradicting social norms will get you slapped down. I know that much. You know that much. So I'm going to stop talking. Any thoughts around that?
Yeah, I was going to say, in addition to, the social environment reinforcing itself and the ways in which you get slapped down for contradicting it, I think it's a lot of these things were set up. They're functioning as they were intended because they were set up by, this small segment of society, which were affluent, cisgendered, heterosexual white men, right? And at this point in time, that identity or your proximity to that identity, because we can also think of privilege as a scale, right? But your proximity to that ultimate identity of like the people who shaped these systems that are also really heavily rooted in colonization, they are continuing to benefit. But even when you look at, like the fallacy of our political systems, not to touch on what I'm sure is an active nerve right now and for you, but for anyone, myself included, even up here in Canada, like everyone's fucking grieving as well. But like it's such a joke, like the discussions around like who's going to benefit who from a tax break perspective, or like people are, with the state of the economy and inflation and cost of living, like people are so hard up, and there's such a distanciation and a lack of awareness of what that's actually like for the people like that are actually running for office or like in these positions of power. They don't know what it's like to be struggling like that, because the system is functioning as it was intended to. But I don't know that even in its inception of like a capitalist economy, I don't know that this was ever the vision. Like I think we've gotten to such a stage that is so unsustainable. But rather than just using common sense, to your earlier point, and being like, this isn't working anymore, let's change it. And equally, like from a power distribution perspective, like maybe white men shouldn't be the only people with a say in the broader community and global community. Like, why don't we build better tables and better systems where there's room for all identities, like groundbreaking. But the problem is that rich 1% just continue to get richer and more powerful. And why would they want to change the system? And those are the people that we need most to affect this change, are actually the ones that it's benefiting the most,
Right. No, great point. It's an interesting point, because you had said you don't think that this was capitalism's intent. What? Because I have a thought on that, but I want to ask you for what do you think was the intent then?
That's a good question. I don't know. I started reading Vulture Capitalism earlier this year, and I need to come back to it because it's pretty heavy. And I think I was listening to it like on my commutes, and you do just reach a limit some days with like understanding the building blocks of capitalism and economic models and systems of production. You do kind of just need a break, like put on some Rihanna or something. I don't know.
I already
so
did,
I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Stop talking. Actually, I already broke. It was no. But no. I don't want to tell my thoughts yet. What was yours?
I think I don't want to say like it's short-sighted, but I think like people, like anything, are thinking only so far ahead, and probably didn't have the information or perspective of where it was, how it was going to look like decades and decades and decades on. Like I don't know that if the people who conceptualized this were to have to watch like a documentary about where we're at here in 2024, I don't know, maybe they would be like, well, 1% of people are thriving. My people are thriving. So let's keep it going. Or if there would be a genuine, like, a genuine sense of like, oh, fuck, we hadn't considered this, and this, or like socioeconomic issues and distribute. I mean, like, even just critical race theory. Yeah, I don't know. I'm genuinely so now just interested to hear your thoughts.
Well, so the first thought that I've got, because, when I was young and impressionable, so this was like, college, undergraduate, because I've actually been young and impressionable up until about 52, and then I started questioning things. But what the hell was I going to say? Oh yeah, capitalism. I remember having a conversation with somebody who said, well, it's just sort of the nature of capitalism. You're going to build a factory and then you're going to bleed the ground dry and then you're just going to leave. And I remember asking, but what do you do with all the money that you spent on like a factory? Like if you have a business and you care about the business, wouldn't you want to do everything you could to sustain it, which would imply taking care of the land around your factory, taking care of the people working at your factory, whatever it is, your business, doesn't have to be a factory. But like my opinion is that a good capitalist business is something that would do everything that we keep asking people to do, which is take care of the environment, take care of the people who work for you, take care of each other. Like, I think that would be the natural result. And maybe I'm super naive, that could be, but it seems like that would be the natural result of a system where everybody has individual rights and everybody has the means of production and anybody can do anything. It seems like it would. And we just sort of went like really far awry. I don't mean to say that this is going well. I just mean to say, I like that look. So this is going well, but it seems like it should have ended up differently. That all the things that we call anti-capitalist now are really should really be part of that.
Yeah, and I wish we were more malleable and flexible and open as a society to genuinely look at the things that aren't working. Like even with something like climate change, right? Like this is like, we could not have a more pressing, threatening issue that should like galvanize and unite all of us globally. Right. And even we saw that with COVID, right? Like I think the optimists were like, could this be the thing that unites us globally and improves our, geopolitical circumstance? Like, but of course not. Like, of course, I do have a pretty big degree of like cynicism at this point in understanding some aspects of human nature in terms of that, like maybe innate othering that we do, and that you really see when it's exacerbated by this like aggressive sense of nationalism and patriotism, which has never sat right with me. It's like it feels so arbitrary the way that we draw these border lines and do that us versus them. And it's like in all contexts, whether you're talking about geographical borders or just like your own community, there's this sense of like the zero sum game and the scarcity mindset. And it's like, there really is enough to go around truly. And if we all, I mean, you spoke about this really beautifully in our conversation on my podcast about your experience in Bangkok, watching the traffic and seeing how they were just so much more willing to like stop and let people in. Because if I stop and let you in, maybe tomorrow when I need someone to let me in, it's reciprocity, right? Like, shocker. Right. But we don't tend to operate that way typically, which is why it was probably so profound when you witnessed that, because it's just not the way that we are in the States and Canada and so much of the world.
Right. Well, and having grown up in Los Angeles too, like, you don't do that. People will honk at you. What are you doing? Letting somebody in? Keep going. They'll pull a gun on you.
Yeah, flip them off while you're at it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you don't need that in your life. But so it is fascinating, though, that when it comes down to it, everything that we're talking about here, I mean, it's all a choice, and it all ends up being, something we could choose not to do, but we don't. And I guess because you mentioned the 1%, it's really the 1% who are being benefited here. None of us. I mean, not me, anyway. Presumably not you, but.
No.
And we work for them.
Well, in some ways, but yeah, we work for them. Yeah.
How sad. So do you ever get, I mean, if you have these conversations, do you ever get somebody just suddenly lights up or something? You have somebody who's kind of following along, not really agreeing. They go, I don't know, no. And then suddenly goes, oh shit, you're so totally on track. Do you ever get those people?
Like, do you mean that they have their moment of awakening with me?
Yes. Yes. They have their egg crack.
Yeah. That's the best
So
feeling ever. And I will say, but I have a great example of this happening, but I will say that I think one of the reasons why for me a podcast was the perfect medium was that I felt for many years like I was banging my head against the wall trying to have these conversations with the goal of like changing somebody's mind and helping them understand why their whiteness was, of course, allowing them to benefit from a system of white supremacy, and having those circular conversations where the person's like, but I worked hard. And it's like, yep, cool. That may still be true. But yeah. And so I think when you get frustrated and you feel like you're not making any headway, something that I realized was that I don't necessarily need to be present for the moment of awakening. I just want to plant a seed that might grow. And to be honest, if somebody's listening in a more passive way, where they're not expected to respond to me right there and then in the moment, but they can just go away and think about it, I think the results are actually a lot greater and a lot more positive. But in terms of an actual real life moment, I have a really special one, which was with my stepdad, who is a lovely, lovely boomer man, but I think fits a lot of stereotypes in that he's a 57-year-old white hetero, to his knowledge, cisgendered man who, would be having the exact opposite conversations throughout his day than what I'm having. Not opposite in that he would contradict everything that I believe, but just in that, like, these topics are not sprouting out in his day-to-day life. He's a contractor. He didn't go to post-secondary, and I would say that he just, in the nicest way, like his existence is fairly simple, in that he isn't thinking critically about why he's doing things a certain way for the most part. And so, of course, you can imagine when I come in talking about critical race theory or systems of oppression, he's a bit like, okay, like, I don't know where to begin here. And I think the defensiveness came up a lot for him, where I would point out something about his privilege. And this is such a common occurrence in these kinds of conversations with white people who were raised or born into poverty, which he was. And so he has, central to his identity is having struggled and worked really hard, and that everything he owns now today, he owns, in his case, not because of intergenerational wealth, but because of what he himself earned. However, he did not have the obstacles in his pathway that, say, a trans woman of color may have had to face, right? And so despite the fact that he didn't have accumulated intergenerational wealth, he still heavily benefited from a white supremacist system, which is something he's never considered. Nor had he been particularly receptive to conversations that I would initiate about that topic, until one day, 2.5 years ago, we were away for a family wedding in Ottawa, staying in an Airbnb, just me, him, and his mom. And I love those eras where you're single and you're just like there with your parents and chilling, and you kind of have opportunities to have conversations that you might not otherwise have. And this topic came up, and I decided, one of the things I think I did well was I stayed really, really calm and I didn't get triggered. And I tried to explain privilege from the time of being a baby, using like salt shakers and candles and things on the table in these two sort of like swimming lanes. And I was like, let's say hypothetically you and this black woman, let's call her Cindy, started out on the same line, which you didn't, but let's not go into the intergenerational stuff right now. Like, of course they didn't start out on the same line, but let's say that you did. And then we're going to talk about you going to school. And then we're going to talk about you, let's say, jump ahead, both of you trying to get your first job in high school. And you have a name, and let's just say that the employer is most likely to be white and most likely to be a white man, especially for going back 57 years, or whatever, 40 years when you're getting your first job. And that white man is just more likely, from a subconscious bias or unconscious bias perspective, to gravitate and identify with the young white boy named Gary Rogers, who's just trying to work really hard, than he might be to the young black woman, because of his own, what am I trying to say? His unconscious bias, or the fact that he hasn't unlearned his own programming, which has programmed him most likely to have racism. So Gary probably gets the job. And then I'm moving his salt shaker ahead a lot farther and quicker than I'm moving hers, and suggesting that maybe she didn't get the first job or the second job or the third job. And maybe he goes to apply for his apartment and he gets it because the landlord's also a white man who sees something of Gary in himself. Gary gets the apartment. She doesn't not get the job or not get the apartment, but she's not getting them as quickly or as easily because the systems are working against her.
Right.
And so I explain it basically all the way through his life until present day. And I said to him, she might have gotten to where you are at today in life. She might have the same amount of property and wealth and, quote, success, but could you possibly say that you worked harder than she, or that that you both worked just as hard, or that, or that you had the same number of obstacles or hurdles? And he finally had this aha moment. And hey, I don't even know if he fucking remembers this from 2.5 years ago, but I remember it working. And I remember him going, oh my God, like she had way more obstacles than I. And to me, that was like Christmas. I was like, hallelujah, we made headway. And that really was something that propelled me further to do the podcast, because it's like, if I can do this on a larger scale and just beam these thoughts into, like I said before, into someone's living room, maybe those little aha light bulb moments could happen more and more for people.
Oh, I think that was a beautiful story. I just want to.
Thank you.
Is he 57 today? Just a quick follow up here. Okay, he's Gen X, not
Yes.
baby boomer, unfortunately. But
I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. He's only 3 years older than I am, so it's. But I think Gen X goes back to 1965. I think birth year of 65. I think. Maybe I'm wrong.
Okay, thank you. Because my mom's 1964. So is she boomer or Gen X?
She would be, so boomer, I guess, technically. But I have a friend also who is
on the cusp.
She's on the cusp, right? Well, I have a friend who's on the cusp too. And it's like, well, but it's not really boomer. It's like late boomer. And that's really different from, And I'm like, no, sorry, you can't have a seat here. We're Gen X over here. You're going to have to go. You're with the oldsters, I'm afraid. Yeah. Here's your walker, by the way. They're bringing it out.
Sucks to suck.
Sucks to suck. I'm a year older than you. Oops. Too bad. You've got your walker. Get out of here. But I love I love how you put that. It was you didn't use this phrase, but you were saying like activism can be like passive. Like it can be, making a podcast could be more active, could be whatever, more effective activism than actually actively going out and smacking somebody. Hey, quit doing this. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
Oh gosh. And it just struck me. It just clunked right into my head. It's because then that person has to make the choice on their own, which is when it's effective, ever effective, that we always end up having to choose our changes. Ooh, that was so good, Lindsay. That was awesome.
I'm honored you think so. Thank you.
Oh, it's really good. That's an awesome point. But, because anytime I started podcast, or, the reason I started podcasting really is because I wanted to work on my voice. There was really nothing else that I wanted to do other than work on my voice and getting over being nervous talking to people. And, to think that like I could have had more of an effect than than I thought is good.
You are absolutely having more of an effect. My gosh, you're so inspiring and eloquent and funny, and you have so much to impart. So if anyone should have a podcast, it's you, my friend.
No, it was only the last 2 years. I was really for up until 2 years ago, I had no idea what was going on. So everything I was buying into capitalism. But it was easy.
Yeah, well, it's so hard, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, it's super easy. It's super because I've had this. Somebody once asked me. I'm trying to remember who it was, but somebody said, "Well, how could your experience be different?" And I said, "Well, I have had the experience of like being a white man in technology, working with tech bros, making a shit ton of cash, because we do that. Just trust me, because you're not going to know, right?" I'm sorry, I didn't mean it like that. But
I'm never going to know.
but But I've had that experience.
The ultimate success.
Yes, right. But I've had that experience. And then I've also had this experience where like I took my car in just to get like the oil change, something ridiculous. And the guy's like, so the guy's pointing to me, he's like, so that down there, we call that a tire. Okay. And that's what actually goes on the road. And when it gets worn, you're going to have a hard time driving in snow. And I'm like, I wanted to go, fuck out to you. Like I rebuilt a
and it must have been
carburetor, man. What are you talking about? It's a tire. I know it's a tire. I rebuilt a carburetor, I rebuilt a brake cylinder. But it's things we don't understand. But so that's important. Like I think it would be great for everybody to be stuck into some of these situations. I mean, it sucks to suffer. It sucks to suck, but it also sucks to suffer. But like giving people the opportunity to suffer helps them see things so much differently.
Yeah, it's so powerful that when you share about the difference in how you're received in the world, like pre and post
Yes.
transition. And it's like, I said this to you before, but like we vitally need those perspectives. But you know, it also makes me think, like, I'm following that train of thought of like when somebody can either through their own lived experience or close proximity to it, understand how absurd it is the way that we treat people differently depending on their physical presentation. Like it's so dumb. But you know what it makes me think of is like empathy feels like it's in short supply. And, you know, my mom asked me this week, because she's such an avid supporter of my podcast and of this whole, you know, mission to unlearn. And I'm so proud of her going on that quest at 60. She'll be in 60 in a couple of weeks. And doing that even when it's harder for her because she's got 30 years on me of these systems taking hold of her. Right. But she asked me, like, which was very complimentary and generous and flattering, but she said, why do you think it is that you're able to do this so well? Or like, what is the recipe that you need to be such an effective advocate or activist or unlearner or, you know, leader in the unlearning space? And I said to her, three things came to mind, and using that combination came to mind. So the first is being smart. Like, and even as I say that, there's a discomfort in me, which is a learned thing of like, it's obnoxious as a woman to say that I'm smart, but being smart is important.
Yes.
And I'm smart.
Yes.
The second is, thank you. The second is having capacity. Having capacity to have hard conversations. I would put an ability to be uncomfortable in that space of capacity. And the third is empathy. You have to give a fuck about people that look and experience life differently to yourself. And you do have to care. And I can't teach empathy. But if you have that trio of you're smart, you have capacity, and you have empathy, you're an empathetic person, I think that combo is pretty unstoppable in this space. And I think that the people who are the most compelling and the most successful at helping people wake up, because I do think that a lot of people are on autopilot. It's like the Matrix, right? And those change makers who really help the masses to wake up are smart, high capacity, high functioning, and empathetic.
I'm definitely going to go with that. And I'm also going to, I will reiterate also, you are definitely smart.
Thank you.
Sure. I do. There are two directions I want to go, but I'm going to ask this question first. Cause you had said your mission. So you see this as like, this is your purpose. This is your life's purpose. I'm saying that totally no sarcasm.
Yeah, thank you. No, I do. I think I learned this term a few years ago, the concept, I think it's a Sanskrit word, dharma, that refers to the intersection of what you're good at and what you're passionate about. Yeah. And when you're doing your dharma, it's kind of like when people say when you're in love, you'll just know. When you're doing your dharma, you'll just know. And I've always known that I had an interest and a joy and a propensity to build strong relationships. So there was always that interpersonal component. But then the other piece of like wanting to make the world better in some way, and then like marrying those skills up and understanding, okay, what am I really good at? I'm a strong communicator. I can build strong relationships. Okay, I've got that here. How do you really want to impact the world? Well, I want to make the world a little bit less shit. I want there to be a little bit less suffering in whatever, insofar as I can affect. So I put those two things together, and that has allowed me to really tackle and get curious about what unlearning means and why we need to unlearn, and who are the people that I can speak to who are unlearning in their own way, in their own topic, like these little subject matter experts across many, many, many layered and overlapping topics, who are exhibiting those behaviors and using those critical thinking frameworks that are so important. And so, yeah, to have the privilege, it really feels like a privilege in this mission to get to go out into the world and connect with people like you who have done so much unlearning, and who in many cases I am in awe of and think are so much smarter and more impressive than I am. But that's the beauty of hosting a podcast, is like, I still get to talk to you and hold space with you and be in community with you. And so, yeah, if I get to do this for the rest of my life, then I think I will have done something purposeful. I hope.
You will have achieved your dharma. It's totally what it is. I get that. I really do. And I see that in you. I see that in the way you talk and the way that you do this podcast, your podcast. But the other thing I wanted to follow up on, because I used a phrase that like thunked into my head, the opportunity to suffer, which is a fascinating thought. We don't notice our privilege until we have the opportunity not to have it. And I guess that's maybe a little better, but the opportunity to suffer. And the thing is, too, like, I know there are many people out there who will be more than willing to say, okay, 1%, come on over to my house for a weekend and I'll teach you some suffering. I know that. But do you think it would necessarily have to be? I mean, because seriously, there's got to be a lot of people who will be like, oh, I'd totally take in Warren Buffett for a weekend. Fucker's going to be scrubbing my kitchen floor, right? With a toothbrush. Show you
what an image.
Show you what it's like. Yeah. Right. He's got like a little apron on, a little French maid outfit, and his toothbrush. Where was I going with
Why
this?
am I turned on?
Oh my gosh. Oh geez.
I'm joking.
No, I know you aren't. It's fine. Don't worry about it. We'll get off the podcast pretty soon. Yeah, you can have a moment alone. Don't worry about it. It's cool. Just keep the image in mind. But I was going to ask you, do we need to experience that, or do you think? Because like I know what I saw in Bangkok, I experienced it and that helped. But at the same time, like, could somebody have explained that to me? Do you think it takes actual experiential data to do that, to learn those things, to unlearn?
Yeah, that's such a brilliant question, and I'm really trying to sit with it. Like I think I'll say in the first instance, like I think that's the quickest way that people grasp it and get it. And I do think that on a lot of levels, unfortunately, people are pretty simple. So it's like, my life good, there are no problems not here, versus like, oh, now my life bad, we have problems. But and to be honest, I don't know if there is hope for affecting that 1%. What I would love to see, though, would be like, let's just take straight white cis men, for example, who I see show up the least in advocacy and activism. And it's because they have experienced the least oppression, if any, right? So it's your proximity to privilege when you're trying to look at your privilege, and then it's like your proximity to whiteness rather, and heteronormativity and cis, all that stuff, like performing well and all those things. But then it's also your proximity to suffering, like you said, that unlocks, which is typically why you see people of color and disabled folks and queer people at the forefront of social progress, because there's that understanding and shared language, and that allows you to be more intersectional, because you can understand, well, I've experienced the harms of these systems in these ways, and you may have experienced them differently, but I get it. So yeah, I think like I would love to see, if not straight white cis men suffer, it's get in community with people and listen. And like, I think the next closest thing to experiencing it themselves is to love people who are experiencing it, and to care. Like, again, you can't teach empathy, but I think exposure can go a long way. And especially when you also pull the thread of their own sense of identity as a good person. And I say this to anyone who is in close proximity to privilege and also isn't very activated in, advocating for social change and advocating for human rights, is like, what has to happen for you to care? Like, does something need to happen to someone directly in your inner circle in order for you to care? Or do you have the capacity to open your eyes and ears and befriend or go and sit in community with, listen to a podcast even? Like, I mean, it's I get frustrated because we have so many opportunities and so much content out there where it is a choice for a lot of these people to just not engage with it. Like, you don't need to necessarily have a trans friend in order to hear what people are saying that is broken, and that what we need and what gender affirming care looks like. You can have that beamed into your AirPods at home and understand that. I mean, you should go make friends with trans people if you're a healed enough person who can be an actual quality friend, right? But and not do harm. But like, you can learn so much without putting that much, without changing your. I mean, I remember having this conversation with a family friend who, I mean, she's part of the queer community, but I think she is just in a lot closer proximity to privilege as a cis white lesbian, affluent lesbian, who just, she doesn't get that she has more privilege than other members of the community. And I will say she's got low empathy. Like, she does not exude empathy at all and never has. And I'll say to her, like, you can chip away, just like change 1% per day. That's it. Like, just listen to 15 minutes of a podcast while you're getting ready in the morning or while you're driving or whatever. Like, you can't tell me you don't have 15 minutes to dedicate to just listening to another person. Just listen. You don't even have to respond. Just listen. So yeah, that's what I would say. I mean, I hope that the answer might be proximity and again empathy, but I say that without a ton of hope that one, on the 1%. You know?
No, I mean, it was a good answer. It was a good answer, because what's interesting, ultimately I ended up thinking it's not even really necessarily the 1% that I'm talking about, because the 1% isn't the one who vote. There weren't, 1% wasn't the 70 whatever million people who voted for Donald Trump, a couple of weeks ago. But to get the people, it's always fascinating to me to see people who are living really not good lives, like not rich lives, not rewarding lives. And you go, well, it could be different. And they go, no, it can't. And you go, well, if you actually got out of this tiny little box, that was a rectangle. I was hoping it would be a square, but that's fine. But you ask, if you could get out of this little box, you might learn something, and maybe you'd end up doing something that would make your life better. But
I think people are scared of change as well. Like, I think that's sorry.
No, I'm finished. Go ahead. Yeah, we have a lag of change for sure. Yeah.
There's a lag. Yeah. People are scared of change. And I think that in some cases, like, people would choose like the devil they know over the devil they don't. And it's like, well, this is objectively shit, but at least I'm familiar with it. Because I think people are like, we're creatures of habit, like I was talking to a friend when I first launched the podcast and trying to understand like why I felt so alone in this quest to be so curious and unlearn and like think critically. And I felt like a lot of people around me weren't doing that. And she was saying like, it's just objectively easier for people to operate on autopilot. And I think it's as small as like, I just go to this grocery store. Why? I don't know. Always have. But then you apply that to the big stuff and it's the same thing. It's like, I just perform my gender in this way. Why? I don't know. Someone told me to when I was a kid, and that's what everyone else is doing. And that's what people who have my body parts do. So that's what I do. But it sounds dumb, but like, that's it. That's how, that's how it is. That's how it be, man.
The thing is, it doesn't sound dumb because it's exactly what we were saying before. I mean, the social environment, its purpose is to reinforce all of the social norms. Otherwise, they wouldn't be norms, right? I mean, they would.
And now we've come full circle. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Which makes it a perfect time, I suppose. So tell me, how does everybody find you on the internet? Because I think that there is so much that you stand to offer the world. Tell us all how we can continue to find you and engage more with you.
Aw, thank you so much. So you can find me at www.gettingreflective.com. Is it .com or .ca? I should probably check that. You can follow me if you want on Instagram. I am just Lindsay Bins. That's my childhood nickname because my first 4 letters of my first name rhyme with the first 4 of my last. So I've always been Lindsay Bins. But you can find me at Lindsay Bins on Instagram. And I'm on Spotify, Apple Pods, all of the normal streaming platforms. My podcast is called Getting Reflective, a podcast about unlearning.
So amazing. Well, I will put all of those URLs in there into the show notes. So make sure you go and follow Lindsay, and just everything you do is just so golden, I think. I love you so much. And again,
I love you so much. I'm so happy we've met.
I know. I mean, again, and not in the creepy, stalkery sort of way, just, in the way
just in the beautiful strangers falling in love on the internet way. Yeah.
Yeah. No, actually, that sounds very, very stalker and creepy, come to think of it, but
not at all. It's not from you.
Okay, good. All right. I would love to continue talking to you, and I want to respect your time. So, plus we're more than an hour in. That, it's a funny little thing here. About 15 minutes in, I was like, oh crap, I hope I don't run out of questions. And now it's like an hour, more than an hour, and I went,
we could go for another 3 hours. Yeah, we would never run out. I think that's the lesson for you and I. Maybe it means in 2025 we have to do a Amethyst on my podcast episode, like ×2, like 2.0, and then I'll come back. Whatever we'll have, or we can just Zoom and be friends. Yes. But I just want to say before we go how much I've enjoyed talking to you again. And I said to you earlier that it was just such a poetic day because I was editing our previous conversation for release on my episode, which for anyone listening, that'll be out by the time this comes out. But yeah, I had you in my living room, and it was just so lovely hearing our wonderful chemistry, and then to get to have this conversation live again today on yours just felt so poetic. So yeah, thank you for giving me the space and for being curious and so complimentary of what I'm doing. And I'm honored to know you and to be at all plugged into your incredible online community. So keep doing all your great stuff.
Oh my gosh, thank you. Jeez, it make me cry. I'm serious. God, I don't know how to follow that. I should just go, okay, hit stop.
Bye. See ya.
Not going to top that. So no, but I will, let me go ahead. I'll do my little standard exit, oh geez. First of all, so thank you so much, Lindsay. Thank you so much for being here. Let's thank our listeners. Thank both of you out there. Thanks for listening. And that fell out of my mouth once. I was trying to say both of our listeners who were trying to hear both of us. And I wasn't really sure where I was going. This was early on. I don't even remember what it was, but I said, I just want to say thanks to both of our listeners. And I went, both of our listeners. It's just like Jim and Judy out there. That's all it is. 2 people.
That's it. Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much, Jim and Judy. We appreciate you all day, But thank you to listeners. I am Amethyst Herrick. I've been speaking with Lindsay Bindman about her Getting Reflective podcast, Unlearning, and then the opportunity to suffer. There you go. So thank you again.